Okay, to remove the speedometer, you need to actually take out the tach or clock first. If you have a tach, unplug from here. If you have a clock, unplug from here. Take out these 4 screws. Out comes the tach. Simple stuff. I've already taken the screws out. And then there's 2 more screws. And then your Speedo's out. Just have one. You want to be careful about the face of the Speedo. You don't want to break the needle or do any damage to it, so you just kind of hold it carefully. Unfortunately, you have to do everything in your hand. You can't set it down on the bench while you're taking it apart. First thing you want to do is you need to loosen this nut on the back to get this mounting plate off. So it just cracks and you just spin it off by hand. Washer there. And then the plate. And then what we need to do is take this back half, because what we need to do is we need to get inside of here. There's a spinning weight that rides on this shaft here that has it's either come off on yours most likely, or it's slid forward enough to where it's just pressing on the back of the needle, and I'll show you what that looks like. But there's 2 screws here, this one and this one, and that gets this piece off. So just take those out. Carefully just lift it straight up and off. There it goes. And that's the way I was talking about. And this is where it presses against this thing. If it's pushing against that, then it just grabs it and usually pegs it at 120 or whatever. We'll set that aside gently. But like I said, it's this weight here, and it's attached to this shaft with just a press fit. It's an interference fit, and so what happens is it gets loose and it falls off, and if it pushes too far forward, it doesn't work. And sometimes it just pushes forward and you can tap it back down. You want the end of the shaft flush with the base of this weight here. So you could just tap it back together. I usually take a wooden dowel and I just put it on the end and set this on something flat, and then just use a hammer or something and just tap it down, and that usually gets it. But a lot of times I've done that, it just falls right back off because that fit is kind of shot at that point. So in order to take it out and clean it up and everything and reattach it, I usually put a little Loctite on there, and that's what holds it for me. You have to take this screw here, which is the drive for the odometer. And once you take that out, then the odometer drive just pops right off. Set that aside. And that shaft won't slip out until you get this worm gear out of here, and that actually is what drives your odometer. And if your odometer doesn't work, it could very well be that there's a nylon gear inside of there that may have gotten eaten up over time. It's pretty common, and you can actually buy a replacement gear from a place called odometergears.com. It's like $25 for the gear. Seems expensive, but they're the only ones that make it, so you're kind of stuck with it. If you want your odometer to work, that's the way you do it. So in order to get that out, there's a ball bearing that's pressed in there, and you just need to pop it out. So I do is I just set it on a board and gently tap it out. And the bearing should come right out. And the gear comes through. And this gear actually is toast. I don't know if you can see. I don't know if it focuses or not, but you can see the gears are kind of, the tips of the gears are all ground down and rounded off. So I could replace that. It's just the nylon part of the gear. You have to save the shaft, but you pull it off and put a new one on. So at that point, you could actually pull this off, and you can actually use a small punch to push this through and pop the shaft out the back. Just be very careful with whatever you use. There's a tiny hole in there, and if it gets deformed or beaten up at all, the speedometer will stop working. It won't work right. So you have to be really careful with that if you want to tap it through. But once you take that out, there's a little brass ring and a washer here. You want to make sure you get them back in the right order. But you can take the whole thing off, clean it, grease it. After you get it back together, you can actually squirt a little grease in the hole where the odometer drive gear came out of too. You don't want to go overboard with the grease because it'll get everywhere, but it just takes a little. And what I've actually been using is a fishing reel lubricant. It seems to work really well for mine. It seems long lasting, and it's the right viscosity and everything, so it works pretty good. So yeah, once you get that apart, what I do is once the shaft's out, I don't have this one. I can't pull apart because I've already actually repaired it. So when the shaft's out, I just take a piece of sandpaper. Let's say this dowel is the tip of the shaft, and I just pinch it over the edge of it and turn it about a quarter to half a turn, and that's it. Just tight pinch and that's it. You don't want to sand it down. You don't want any smaller than we started with. You just want it to be rough enough to where it will hold. And then what you do is you put a little bit of Loctite Red on there, just a very small amount, and wipe it around there so that it's just a light film of it, and then gently slide it back in without getting the Loctite on other things. And then put this weight back on and then tap it down. And then let it sit a little bit so the Loctite can dry. Once it's on there and on there good, you want just the tiniest bit of play. Not much at all when you're done. So front to rear, there's almost nothing on this. That's kind of where you want it. And then after you're done doing that, you just put it all back together the same way you took it apart. You put the worm gear in first. Poke it down in there. You put that little ball bearing in there, and that needs to be tapped in. What I do when I tap that back in is I take a little socket and I put it over the worm gear like that so that it's supported. Because you don't want to start tapping on things and damage that little gear. A little dowel over it. And now it's back in there. And the gear should float back and forth just a little bit. Essentially, once that bearing gets in there, it's kind of loose, but that's the way it's supposed to be. And once that's together, and then you can just put it back on the speedometer. And that's, you want to make sure this worm gear is on the same side as the drive for the odometer. And putting it back on, you just got to be real careful with it because there's a teeny tiny little pin there, and there's a teeny tiny hole, and they have to line up. And if you push down on it too hard, you could bend it over and damage it or something like that. So you just want to be careful with that. So I put it on there, and I just kind of slide it around until I feel it fall in, and boom, it's ready to go. So let's give this a try. And there it goes. That was quick and easy. And then you'll just put those two screws back in that you took out initially. So yeah, the order that I'm putting it back together is a little bit different. I'm going to put the odometer drive. You can take that off. Actually, you could have taken it off before you took these two screws out, but it doesn't really matter. You definitely want to put it back because it needs to be adjusted once it goes back on. You'll want to put it back on in the order or you want to put it back on kind of last thing. So those are too snugged in now. You need to go crazy tightening it. Don't damage anything. But now you should actually be able to grab the back of that speedometer and spin it. And it should start working for you. Of course, all I can grab is the bushing on this one. There it goes. So, and if I were turning it and it jumped all the way to 120, well, then I did it wrong. But yeah, you just want it to just turn lightly like that. That's where you want to be with that one. And then you put the odometer drive back on. So that just pops right over there. And then put the screw in. Run it down. You don't need to tighten it all the way. And then before it's completely tight, slide it over and make sure it meshes with those gears, and then tighten it. And you can put like a small dab of grease right there too, as well as up here, so that it's nicely lubricated. And then you just put the back on, and it all goes back together. In case you forgot when you took it apart, when the thing is upright, those horns kind of face up. Done, and then you put it all back in the console the same way you took it out.